Order, order. Jeremy Wright to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair for this debate, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present on this very important subject. Sir Edward, my constituent Jamie Scott was a fit 44-year-old when he had his AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccination on the 23rd of April last year. He woke with a headache on the 3rd of May, then experienced vomiting and impaired speech. He was taken to hospital by ambulance, where he had multiple operations and was in a coma for more than 4 weeks. His wife, Kate, was told by doctors that he may not survive, and if he did, that he would likely be severely disabled. The couple have 2 young children. Jamie was diagnosed with a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, or CVST, and subsequently vaccine-induced thrombocytic thrombocytopenia, or VITT. He has, I'm pleased to say, now recovered somewhat, but is still unable to return to the life he led before. His consultant's opinion in December was very clear, and it said the following: "It is very highly likely that the vaccine was responsible for the development of his symptoms, with no other possible explanation for the development of the symptoms." Sir Edward, Jamie and Kate Scott are here today, listening to me describe what happened to them, because their lives were changed utterly last year when Jamie did as the government urged him to do and received a vaccination. And I should make it clear that neither I nor they are making any argument against vaccination, but we are arguing that the relatively tiny number of people who are injured by state-advocated vaccination should be properly looked after. And of course, the Scott story is not the only one. I have heard, and I know you will have done, Sir Edward, from several colleagues who cannot be here today about the similar experiences of their constituents. For example, my honourable friend for Burton and Uttoxeter's constituent, Mrs. Birch, who was left near death and immobile in hospital and remains significantly disabled. Or my honourable friend for Grantham and Stanford's constituent, Mr. Walker, a former marathon runner and semi-professional football referee, who now finds even getting dressed leaves him breathless and cannot live independently. Sir Edward, these people too did as government asked of them and have been seriously injured as a result. This, of course, is not a new problem. People have been injured by vaccinations before, and government has responded. Notably with the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, or VDPS, established by the Vaccine Damage Payment Act of 1979, on the logic that injuries consequent on state-recommended vaccination needed special treatment. That scheme was intended as an interim measure, but no further legislation has emerged, although it is true to say that COVID-19 vaccines were included in the scope of the scheme in December of 2020. Happy to give way.
My constituency did what she believed was right by getting vaccinated, but was one of those who had a blood clot after the vaccination. The clot caused her to have a stroke, and now she's unable to work. Her family are very concerned that she's going to be classed as not disabled enough to get any damages payout. And does he agree? We need to look at these very rare and few cases where people have suffered damages but might be falling through the nets.
Yes, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. I'm sorry to hear about her constituent, and I agree with her. I think it is important that we do something differently in relation to what she rightly says is a relatively small number of cases. And if she'll bear with me, I want to come exactly to the point she makes about disablement as one, it seems to me, of deficiencies of the scheme. I mentioned the VDPS, Sir Edward, and of course all help for those injured by vaccines is of course welcome. But there are, in my view, 3 things wrong with the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, and I want to say something about each of them. The first is that it simply takes too long to pay out. The VDPS is a no-fault scheme, but it does require, not unreasonably, a causative link between vaccination and injury to be established. The problem is the time it seems to take to establish that link in the minds of the scheme administrators, even in cases like that of the Scots, where consultant opinions are clear and unequivocal. The Scots application under the scheme was submitted on the 3rd of June last year. It was finally approved on the 20th of June this year. And on the latest figures I have, and it may well be the Minister has more up-to-date figures, there are 2,407 applications to the scheme related to COVID-19 vaccines, and cases are currently being processed at the rate of 13 a month. And at that rate, it will take more than 15 years to process all the cases. Happy to give way.
My constituent, thank you very much, Mr. Edward, and my constituent Lisa Shaw, who's a BBC presenter in the North East, died after getting a blood clot as a result of the vaccine, leaving their young son without a mother and her partner Gareth absolutely devastated. Now, he came to see me in my constituency surgery a very long time ago, months and months ago, and they're still waiting. And there are a lot of these people who will be in situations where they've got huge financial commitments, maybe families, maybe they're unable to work if they haven't died but are disabled. And does my honourable friend agree with me that the speed is of the essence here? We've seen recent scandals, such as the contaminated blood scandal, which has taken decades to resolve. Isn't it right that we need to learn the lessons of those and actually get these payments out to people as quickly as possible?
Yes, I agree entirely with my honourable friend. I think he puts it very well. And I think it's important not just that we have the right scheme, and I don't believe yet that we do, but also, as he says, that when that scheme is in place, it pays out quickly. And it's clear that the scheme in place at the moment is not doing that. And it simply isn't acceptable or feasible for families in severe financial distress to wait the length of time they're being asked to wait. And the example that he gives is a good one. The example he gives is also important in another respect, because there's something else the government needs to do. And that is in relation to those cases where vaccine injury is fatal, as in his constituent's case, the government needs to protect entitlement to benefits, as it has done with other similar schemes, which it doesn't currently do in relation to payouts under the vaccine damage payment scheme, whether that's universal credit or some other benefits. That entitlement post-death needs to be protected in a way that the law cannot currently do. The second problem, Sir Edward, with the VDPS, as I see it, is that it requires a 60% level of disablement. And the first thing to say about that is that the percentage of disablement can be hard to quantify in these cases, as Jamie Scott's consultant made clear in her opinion. But the second thing to say is that 60% is a very high bar. There can be significant injury or disablement that does not meet that threshold, but is still life-changing. And the VDPS is all or nothing. It pays out the full amount or nothing at all. In other words, you could be adjudged to be 59% disabled as a direct result of vaccination, but receive no compensation at all under the scheme. And Sir Edward, that cannot be right. I give way.
One of the issues within that, just before you get to the payment system, is this issue of support. So my constituent Charlotte was a 39-year-old healthy mother of 3 children, and I am furious and appalled that I have approached 3 government ministers, 2 NHS trusts and the local GP asking for someone to help her with the myriad of health conditions she has as a result of doing the right thing, of getting her vaccination. She hasn't got long COVID. The long COVID units and the clinics don't want to talk to her. No one wants to support her. She's currently going to Germany for treatment. Her life has been destroyed and she cannot be a mother, and yet not one minister or anyone else seems to want to make sure that this very small cohort of people have a meaningful pathway to care and support. So does he agree with me that we need to get a grip of this very small number of people, and we need to have ministers reach out to every single family individually to make sure they know what support they can get, to make sure there is a care pathway, and to help MPs to help their constituents?
Yes, again, I do agree with my honourable friend. I think she puts her point very powerfully, and it seems to me that there is an opportunity for the government to do better in this. And I hope that my honourable friend and her colleagues will take up that opportunity, because we are talking about people in very great need who have done absolutely the right thing. There is no fault whatsoever on their part, and the government is best served, it seems to me, by helping them not just for individual reasons, but collectively because of the impact it will have on government policy. And I want to come back to that point. But as she says, the level of support that's currently on offer is not adequate. And the third problem with the VDPS is that payouts under it are limited to £120,000. Now, that may, of course, sound like a lot of money, but it's certainly not enough to compensate for more serious injury and loss of earnings and amenity over lifetimes, especially for people in their 40s, like Jamie Scott, who are disproportionately highly represented in the figures of those who've suffered vaccine-related injury. Now, I appreciate that the Minister will say that the VDPS is not designed to be full compensation, but rather an additional payment that does not prejudice a right to pursue damages through the courts. But I want, if I may, to explore that argument for a moment. The fact that VDPS payments cannot and will not constitute full compensation in many of these cases makes legal action in them almost inevitable. And when these cases are brought, they are likely to be brought against the government because of the perfectly sensible indemnities given to those firms who've produced the vaccines by the government. And the cases brought will either be won by those injured or lost. If they are won, the government will be paying full compensation for injury with additional and avoidable legal costs added. And if they are lost, then people who have suffered for doing the right thing, the thing that the government asked them to do, will not be compensated for hardship they've suffered through no fault of their own. So win or lose, the government should not want these cases litigated. Either it will seem that compensation is being dragged out of the government, or it will seem that it is being denied in what the public are likely to think are highly deserving cases. And worse still, these cases will put incidents of vaccine injury in the spotlight. We are rightly, Sir Edward, proud of the widespread take-up in what has been a successful and ongoing vaccination programme. But that take-up relies on public confidence in the COVID-19 vaccine programme, confidence which is itself based on the safety of the vaccine. And it is, let's be clear, overwhelmingly safe. But it is not universally safe. No vaccine is. And the cases we're discussing today demonstrate that. So the government needs people to know, surely, that if they are in the tiny minority of those injured by the vaccine that they are being urged to take, that they will be looked after. And if people cannot be confident of that, and see that they cannot be confident of that as they witness these cases being litigated, then it is likely to damage uptake of the vaccine. And of course, we must recognise the government may need to pursue mass vaccination again in the future. So, Sir Edward, it seems to me the government should properly compensate those injured by COVID-19 vaccines for reasons of policy, as well as for reasons of morality. So the question that follows is, can it be done better? And of course you would expect me to say, Sir Edward, yes it can. These are relatively few cases in number, which means that the financial liability for government is relatively limited. There are domestic precedents we can follow, for example, the Thalidomide Trust. And there are international examples we can look to as well. The comparable scheme in Canada is also a no-fault scheme, which compensates for severe, life-threatening or life-altering injury that may require hospitalisation or a prolongation of existing hospitalisation, and results in persistent or significant disability or incapacity, or where the outcome is a congenital malformation or death. But significantly, there is no percentage disablement requirement, and crucially, no upper limit to the level of compensation that may be awarded. In Australia, their scheme covers a clinical condition or administration-related injury, most likely as a result of receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, involving hospital treatment and which results in at least $1,000 worth of losses. Again, it's a no-fault scheme, but it has no percentage disablement requirement and no upper limit to the compensation amount. But perhaps most strikingly, the no-fault compensation scheme attached to the COVAX programme, whereby countries, including the United Kingdom, make vaccines available to developing countries, can award up to 12 times the GDP per capita of the claimant's country. In the UK, that would mean an upper limit roughly 3 times that of the VDPS. And it means that the UK government is funding better vaccine injury compensation for people in other countries than it is for people in our own. And that surely is not a defensible position. So, Sir Edward, I say to the Minister that the government must do better, and it must do better soon. It must either reform the VDPS in order to make it more similar to the best international comparators, or it must find a way to settle the inevitable legal actions in these cases swiftly and fairly. It must surely do so in its own interests, because in the end, the cost to government of failing to compensate those who've acted on government policy will be higher than the cost of compensating them. And Sir Edward, it's because I support vaccination that I want to see confidence in vaccination maintained. But mostly the government should act because the people we are talking about did the right thing at the behest of their government. Their government now needs to do the right thing by them.
The question is that this House has considered COVID-19 vaccines and the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme. Philippa Whitwood.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward. Obviously, we're here to discuss the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme 1979, and my interest is as chair of the all-party group on vaccinations for all, so it's quite clear I'm absolutely and utterly pro-vaccination. And I think we can be grateful within the whole scope of vaccines just how rare significant side effects or damage actually is. But it is important, as the Honourable Member was saying, if we're going to maintain confidence in vaccination in principle, but also in further COVID-19 vaccines, that people feel secure and supported, that they're not hearing horror stories of people who have been hurt in some way by the vaccine and then just left stranded. It is vital that we do that, or what we will see is a rise in vaccine scepticism, vaccine hesitancy, and that will be manipulated exactly as we have seen over the last couple of years. Yes?
The other point I would make as a former civil servant is that I believe that this caseload is so small that it is not unfair to expect ministers to look at each case individually. That capacity there, it is capable. And when you act in the national interest, because at the time of vaccination it was to protect others around you, not just to protect yourself, many who've had negative consequences were perfectly healthy and did so to protect their loved ones. They deserve the bare minimum of a minister looking individual, case by case, to see what support they need and whether they deserve to vaccine payment or whether they deserve exceptional support in some way. Does she agree?
I totally agree. I mean, we're talking in the government response to this petition of 174 cases. When I was a breast cancer surgeon and there was the scandal about PIP implants, which frankly I knew we had never used, I still had to go through every single breast reconstruction I had done in a period of 17 years to be able to absolutely verify that that was not the implant. It is absolutely possible with such numbers. And at the moment, only 11 of those have been settled. Now, only 2% in recent years have been successful. Whenever any kind of scheme is only having that kind of return, you have to look at it. And as was commented, the long wait, people are left maybe not able to work, maybe with family pressures, as we've already heard, with no support. And this issue of 60% disablement, who is deciding that? And exactly as was said, it's an absolute cut-off. And even the maximum payment, it's not been reviewed since 2010. It wouldn't cover you for 20 or 25 years of lost earnings and ability. The government say it's not compensation, and I think a no-fault scheme absolutely right. But I raised this issue with the member for Stratford-on-Avon when he was Vaccines Minister in December 2020, that if the government were removing liability from pharmaceutical firms, they had to step in and replace. So I would like to see the VDPS improved for all vaccine users, But I think that COVID-19 is a very specific case, and I think urgent action is needed, and even more important to get that financial support. We obviously heard about cerebral venous sinus thrombosis and how catastrophic, but thankfully how rare it is. But the thrombocytopenia, not thrombocytopenia, the thrombosis, the microthrombosis that people have had, but also autoimmune responses to the vaccines have led to a whole array. My constituent, who doesn't want to be named, suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome. That is now recognised and mentioned in association with the vaccines. It's a neurological problem. He has partial facial paralysis and has lost balance. Now, that may sound quite minor, but he worked at heights in a major physical job and hasn't been able to work since spring 2020. So people like him, he is terrified of the 60% disablement because he can imagine that when he walks into a room, regardless of his facial appearance or his balance, people will think, well, you're not really that bad. But he can't do the job he was doing before. And I think it is vital that we take these cases out of the VDPS, deal with them quickly to ensure confidence in the COVID-19 vaccine going forward, but also take the time to actually change the VDPS, to make it responsive, to make it quick, and to make it something the public believe in. Even in total, there are currently only just over 2,000 cases. Even working through those is not an overwhelming number if it maintains vaccine confidence and the benefit that vaccination brings us in all age groups throughout our lives and for multiple diseases.
Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, it's always a pleasure to speak in any of these debates, and I thank the honourable gentleman for Kenilworth and Southend for putting forward a very, very good case and for illustrating it incredibly well. Always a pleasure to follow the honourable lady. She knows this. I always look forward to her contributions because I believe they're based upon the evidential facts of what the honourable lady knows, and she was able to express that very, very well today in her contribution, and we thank her for that. For almost 2 years, we have been encouraged and have encouraged our constituents to be vaccinated for COVID. The honourable gentleman said that, the honourable lady said that, others have said it in their interventions, to do their bit to protect themselves and protect others. We only recently have begun to see the impacts that vaccines can have on individuals. It's sad, it's unfortunate, and devastating for families and friends who have seen loved ones' health deteriorate, and for those who have, in some cases, sadly passed away. It is therefore essential that we do our bit through this debate, through the honourable gentleman's contribution for his asking for this debate, to ensure that the vaccine damage payment scheme is swift and accessible for those who deserve to take advantage of it. Now, they're not a great number, as others have said, but they're very important. And I know the Minister will respond in a positive fashion. I look very much forward to what the honourable lady's got to say, and indeed what the Shadow has got to say as well. We've all heard the stories from their friends, from our families, from our constituents, of people we know or know of who may have suffered negative impacts of the COVID vaccine. I'm glad to say there haven't been very many, but what number they are, they're significant and they have to be changed and they have to be addressed, and that's what this debate's really about. These people have suffered life-changing conditions because of their willingness in doing their public duty. I was glad to take the vaccine. I was glad we had no side effects to it. I'm glad that the vaccine was able to give ourselves and millions of other people across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland the immunity from this awful, awful disease. Under the 1979 Vaccines Act, first payments of the £120,000 lump sum went out in June, but many have felt let down by the out-of-date scheme. Hundreds more across the rest of the United Kingdom are waiting assessments and decisions, and there are those in Northern Ireland who wait those equal assessments and decisions as well. As of May this year, over 1,300 claims have been made, with only 20, my goodness, only 20 referred for medical assessment. Not enough and too slow. There is no doubt that there have been issues with punctuality under the 1979 Act. I understand that. I understand the reasons for it. But as always in this House, it's not about the reasons for it, it's about the solutions. So we look to the Minister to give us some encouragement to where we are. Some applicants are waiting almost 6 months for assessments and decisions. The scope allows for those over 60% disabled mentally or physically due to adverse impacts of the COVID vaccine to qualify. And government has urged that this is not a compensation payment, but it's intended to ease the burdens caused by severe vaccine damage. Whatever the reasons, whatever the criteria, I think the request from the honourable gentleman and from others here is to get it done and get it done quickly and not to delay. Sir Robert, we have heard of instances where the AstraZeneca vaccine has impacted on a small group of people in terms of clotting. Very happy to, yeah.
As ever, he's making a lot of sense. Can I ask him one thing? He will have heard me say that the government essentially has a choice here. It can either reform the VDPS or it can deal properly with the cases that are going to come its way. Does he share my view that what we're looking at here for the government is something of a burning platform? They will get these cases, and if they would rather litigate them in the full glare of publicity, then they're perhaps foolish to do so, but that will be their option. But it would better, wouldn't it, if they dealt with them more quietly?
Yeah. I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his intervention and for his words of wisdom. Minister, there's an easy option. It's all sitting before us. And I think, in my book, I agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman. I believe if we can do it an easy way, you know something, let's just do it the easy way. Let's address the issue in the way that can give us less hassle, give government less hassle, satisfy the needs and the requests of our constituents, and ensure that we can move forward. I said that I was saying it in terms of clotting. As of June this year, there were 444 cases of blood clots out of 49 million doses of AstraZeneca given, and there is still evidence that not all of these were caused by the vaccine. Regardless of this, why should we not be speaking on behalf of those that have been impacted? There is no amount of money in the world that can fill the void of loss. You can't measure it in pounds, you can't measure it in pennies. But we must do our best to ensure the process of vaccine damage payments are timely and simple. That's a request we're asking for. I don't think we're asking for the world. I think we're just asking for something that can be done very easily, I believe, in my simplistic way of looking at things, by government to do it in a way that can give succour right away and can do away with the thoughts, the process of litigation that will be long, laborious and be much more expensive.
On that point, though, isn't the problem that these people affected cannot go to court because there is the civil immunity that the manufacturers and suppliers of the COVID vaccine have received?
It certainly is, and it's never, things are never straightforward. There are complex issues, but today our request is quite simply on behalf of those who have contacted us, who have contacted the Honourable Lady, who have contacted each and every one of us. We're aware of those. We have them in Northern Ireland as well, and we have some of my constituents who are impacted. So I think it's really important that we do that. Sorry, yes. Yeah.
I thank the honourable gentleman giving way. It's not just a matter of who they sue, whether a pharmaceutical company or the government, but is it not, as with contaminated blood, that people who are injured by vaccines or damaged in some way through healthcare struggle with some long court battle? When you look at how long that scandal has been running, surely we don't want to put people through litigation if it can actually be settled more fairly.
As always, the Honourable Lady gives us a focus of the way forward. I've followed since I've come here as an MP, first elected in 2010, the contaminated blood scandal has been one of the ones that's been very much to my fore. It's been in the minds of all. The Honourable Lady, forgive me for not knowing our constituency, who's the spokesperson for the opposition in this issue. Hull North, I think it might be, the Honourable Lady is. But I'm pretty sure that we've waited all that time for the compensation. We have some hope now of compensation coming, but we have many people in that compensation chain for the contaminated blood scandal who yet have not got satisfaction. So the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Litigation, by its nature, is traumatic. It does add to the problems for those who are already distressed because of their physical health, or they have distress, anxiety, depression, and all sorts of other issues as well. So if there is a way of doing it, and there is, and the Right Honourable Gentleman has referred to what that is, let's do it. The second reading for the 2022-2023 bill is scheduled to be heard at the end of October, I understand. And I would like to hear that we must do well by our constituents across the whole of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland who have fell victim to this particular problem. We know that the 79 Act does not apply to many other vaccines, and we have heard so many anti-vax rumours and speculation. I, for one, am willing to put my faith in healthcare professionals, like the Honourable Lady who spoke before me, as an example. She's not here as a healthcare, she's here as the MP, but she still has the expertise and the knowledge and the understanding of that. And there are many outside of this who have as well. To ascertain why someone has been impacted in a certain way by the COVID vaccines, I previously added my name to present this bill earlier in the year, and I'm very happy to do the same again. To conclude, Sir Everard, we must stand by those who have stood by us in doing their civic duty to be vaccinated. I call upon the Minister, beseechingly call upon the Minister and Government to engage with respective health ministers in the devolved nations, in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, to collectively work to ensure that this bill can be passed with the support of others, to ensure that those impacted by the COVID vaccines have something to ease burdens of past and future. I hope, Sir Everard, that along with other members here today, Government will address these issues with compassion, with understanding, and do it now. Thank you.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Sir Edward. I thank the right honourable member for Kenilworth and Southam for securing today's important debate on COVID vaccines and the vaccine damage payment scheme, and also for the manner in which he presented the case. I think we can all agree that it is vital that those with genuine claims are supported, and that spurious anti-vax conspiracists are not allowed to undermine legitimate claims. Listening to the debate, it's clear that it is beyond time for the UK Government to review compensation scheme. While the vast majority of vaccinations do not cause serious side effects, in a tiny, small number of incidents, there have been and there will be serious side effects. Therefore, it is true of any medicine, and even with over-the-counter medicines capable of having seriously detrimental side effects. It is a tragic reality that while vaccination is the right course of action and the risk from harm from coronavirus far outweighs the risk of harm from the vaccines, some people will have serious side effects, including disablement and death. The first payment under the compensation scheme in the UK has been handed out to a bereaved individual whose partner lost their life as a consequence of the AstraZeneca vaccination. There are serious, valid claims of harm, and they must be respected and listened to. This is also vital to maintain faith in the UK's vaccination programme, both now and in the future. As those claiming themselves make clear, making claims is not about being anti-vaccine. Anti-vaxxers have attempted to abuse the scheme, however, and undermine the delivery of compensation. At one point, it was claimed that the compensation scheme was for anyone who wasn't made fully aware of the health risks of the vaccine. Such actions are designed to overwhelm the system, making it harder for people with legitimate claims to be heard, which ultimately undermines faith in the system, and promote their unfounded claims that the extremely unlikely consequences of the vaccine were hidden. Similar actions were seen in America, with many spurious claims for compensation, including issues such as having a sore arm after vaccination. That was the only symptom, by the way, I had of mine, and it was similar for many of my friends. A regular and experienced side effect, as we know. We must support those with valid claims, while also ensuring that anti-vaxxers do not hijack it for their propaganda purposes. As I stated earlier, it is beyond time for the UK Government to review of the compensation scheme. Yes, certainly.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. I understand exactly the point he's making. Would he agree with me that the best gift we could give to the anti-vaxxers would be to allow them to say that if you were injured by the vaccine, you'd receive no compensation and no help from the government?
Yeah, I'm in absolute agreement with the right honourable member. And MPs have warned since 2015, before I was in Parliament, that the system was out of date and in need of review. Payment levels under the scheme were set in 2010 and have not been reviewed since. The 60% disablement criteria has been criticised as out of date by lawyers specialising in vaccine injury cases and not reflecting the reality of some consequences of COVID and the COVID vaccinations. In the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic and the largest mass vaccination programme in the history of the United Kingdom, it is well beyond time that the vaccination compensation scheme is reviewed. This is made even more necessary in the face of the spiralling cost of living crisis, with those who have been disabled or bereaved by the vaccine injury facing higher costs and lower incomes. In conclusion, the SNP call on the UK Government to deliver an uplift to the compensation quantity and to ensure that no legitimate cases are being denied their rightful compensation. Thank you.
Andrew Bruno.
Thank you, Sir Edward, and it's a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship for this debate on COVID-19 vaccines and the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme. And can I commend the way that the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Rugby and Kenilworth, set out such a compelling case for reform. I mean, the time to pay out, the application process being so painfully slow from applications going into approval. The level of disablement is really hard to assess, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has said, and setting the level then at 60% really does penalise so many people who ought to benefit from this scheme, and the upper limit as well. It seems crazy, doesn't it, that the COVAX scheme is 3 times more generous than the scheme we have in the United Kingdom. So I thank him for setting out those facts to Parliament, and I hope it's something that the Minister has taken on board. I also want to thank him for setting out the case of the Scott family and Jamie Scott in particular, one of a number of people who have been affected by the COVID-19 vaccination, but whose voices absolutely have to be heard in this Parliament, and hopefully we can address some of those concerns that he has set out. Because this issue is very important, and it's equally important that facts remain at the heart of the debate. From the outset, I want to make very clear, Sir Edward, the COVID-19 vaccination programme has saved countless lives, and it's enabled us to reclaim many liberties which we were forced to forfeit over the course of the pandemic. Nearly 51 million people have been fully vaccinated here in the United Kingdom, and for the overwhelming majority of people, the vaccine is safe, it's effective, and it protects against COVID-19. But we're here today to talk about that small number of people for whom the vaccine has had devastating consequences. But data has consistently shown that the rates of death concerning COVID-19 are lower for the fully vaccinated in all age groups in comparison to the unvaccinated. In August 2021, just 8 months after the first vaccine had been administered in the UK HSA estimated over 90,000 lives had already been saved in just England alone, thanks to that vaccination programme. COVID vaccines went through several stages of clinical trials before being approved and met strict independent standards for safety, quality and effectiveness. As with many medical interventions, there are, sadly, instances of serious side effects and in extremely rare cases of death. According to the Office for National Statistics, there have been 49 deaths in England since 2020, in which the COVID vaccine was mentioned on the death certificate. Whilst incredibly low, given the scale of the vaccine rollout, every single one of those deaths is a profound tragedy, and I can only extend my utmost sympathy to individuals and their families who have been impacted by rare vaccine side effects. And whilst no amount of money can bring back a loved one or reverse physical damage, it is only right that those who have developed health problems or lost a relative as a result of vaccination can access a financial payment. Now, the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme was created, as we've heard, back in 1979, and I think it's a scheme that, certainly the principles of it, are something that all sides of this House would agree is important and necessary. I have, however, been concerned at reports of operational delays and inadequate support given to those who have suffered from rare vaccine side effects. whilst I fully appreciate that identifying a causal link between COVID-19 vaccinations and damage is a complex task, it is disappointing that the first vaccine damage payment related to the COVID-19 vaccination programme was only made in July 2022, a full year after similar payments had been made in other countries like Norway. In November last year, the VDPS was administered by the Department for Work and Pensions alongside the Department for Health and Social Care. Since then, its management has been transferred to the NHS Business Services Authority, working exclusively on behalf of the Department of Health and Social Care. Given that the scale of the COVID-19 vaccination programme is likely to increase applications to the scheme, can the Minister, when she comes to respond to the debate, reassure colleagues that the NHSBSA and its contractor Crawford and Company will have the requisite capacity to process applications in a timely manner moving forward? Further to that point, I note that in response to a written parliamentary question in December of last year, the Minister stated that the NHSBSA will, and I quote Sir Edward, review the VDPS's processes to improve claimants' experiences through increasing personalised engagement, reducing response times and providing general support. The Minister also stated that NHSBSA will, and I quote, work with the Department on service improvements and further digitalisation, including an online claim form to increase accessibility. I'd be grateful then if in her response the Minister could outline how this work is progressing and what recent discussions she's had with her departmental colleagues on streamlining the VDPS. I would also appreciate it if the Minister could set out the current average processing time from when a claim is made to when it reaches its conclusion, and if there are any plans to improve upon this average processing time. Now, as the Minister will no doubt be aware, payment levels for the VDPS have not been reviewed since 2007, when they were increased under the previous Labour government. In a recent response to a written question from my right honourable friend for Ealing Central and Acton, the Minister stated that, and again I quote, there is currently no formal plan to review the payment amount for the VDPS. So can she clarify if that is still the government's position, and if so, what assessment her department has made of the current level of support for those who are experiencing lifelong severe side effects, and especially considering the evidence presented to this debate today in regard of the levels available for countries in the COVAX initiative. I reference in particular, Sir Edward, a recent BBC report about Hamish Thomas. Hamish suffered from extremely rare side effects after a polio vaccination and remains paralysed to this day. He rightly received a payout from the VDPS. Hamish says, however, that in the grand scheme of things, especially for someone's entire lifespan, the VDPS won't cover the vast amounts of medical expenses that are needed to be paid for and which the NHS, unfortunately, cannot provide. What assessment has the Minister made of stories like Hamish's, and will she commit to meeting with campaigners to ensure that those who require support can access it, either through the VDPS or by other means? In conclusion, Sir Edward, it is vital that the vaccine damage payment scheme is protected. But it's also vital that it is fit for purpose and it has the confidence of the public at large. There is a right way of dealing with this, and the Right Honourable Gentleman, I think, has set that out to avoid the litigation and to avoid the mistakes that we've seen with other scandals, and in particular the contaminated blood scandal. It is a public health imperative that people appreciate that vaccines are overwhelmingly safe and effective. But the public also deserve to know that in extremely rare cases where an individual experiences harm or damage, that there is suitable and proportional support available. And before I conclude, Sir Edward, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Minister. Reshuffles are difficult to predict, and I wish her well in whatever might come out of the new Prime Minister's decisions as to who's who in the government. But as this might be our last face-to-face, and I don't know what the future holds for her, I want to thank her for her work and indeed for her courtesy that she's shown to me as I've shadowed her from the opposition benches, and I wish her all the best of luck in whatever the Prime Minister dreams up for her new government. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir Edward, and as always it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to start by thanking my right honourable friend, the member for Kenilworth and Southam, for securing this important debate today, and for, to other honourable members for their participation. I think it's been a very measured debate and a very important one. I'd like to also offer my sympathies to his constituents, who I also would like to welcome to the public gallery today. And whilst he'll understand that I cannot comment on the case itself, my thoughts are with his constituent and his family. After clean water, vaccination is the most effective public health intervention in the world for saving lives and promoting good health. Globally, we have one of the best and most innovative immunisation programmes, with vaccine confidence and uptake rates amongst the highest in the world. This allowed us to get COVID-19 and many other vaccine-preventable diseases under control. The UK became the first country in the world to deploy an approved COVID-19 vaccine, saving countless lives and helping to prevent NHS from becoming overwhelmed. The NHS will also this week become the first healthcare system in the world to use next-generation bivalent COVID vaccines. All vaccines must go through a rigorous testing and development process before authorisation to ensure they meet the strict standards of safety, quality and effectiveness set by the Independent Medicines Regulator, the MHRA. We are also guided by the latest clinical and scientific evidence and advised about vaccine safety and efficacy from the independent JCVI. Unfortunately, we know that in some rare instances, some individuals may sadly have experienced harm because of vaccination. The Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, or VDPS, provides a one-off, tax-free payment to those individuals who have been found on the balance of probabilities to have been harmed by a vaccine. The NHS Business Services Authority, NHS BSA, which has a proven track record of delivering services which support the NHS, manages the operational side of the VDPS on behalf of the Department for Health and Social Care, following transfer from the DWP in November 2021. VDPS assessments are performed on a case-by-case basis by experienced, independent medical assessors who have undertaken specialist training in vaccine damage and disablement assessments. COVID-19 vaccines were included in the VDPS from the very start of the vaccine rollout in December 2020. This approach is in line with most comparable countries, with similar existing schemes in the US and other G7 countries extended to cover COVID-19. This allowed those whose severe disability was found on the balance of probabilities to be linked to a COVID-19 vaccine to receive timely support through this established, tried and tested system. My right honourable friend mentioned the COVAX programme, and the COVAX programme that's been set up as a result of the COVID-19 vaccine provides a no-fault lump sum compensation payment in full and as a final settlement of any claims. The VDPS is different, as whilst a one-off lump sum, it's not compensation, it's not given in full and final settlement, leaving it open to individuals to make a claim for damages through the courts. And also the COVAX programme is time limited to the 30th of June 2023, which is just next year. As of June 2022, the first outcomes of COVID-19 related VDPS claims have begun to be communicated to claimants. Given the novelty of the COVID-19 vaccines, processing claims had to wait for scientific evidence to reach a more settled position to better understand the potential relationship between the vaccines and certain adverse events. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to forgiving way. Before she moves off international comparisons, if she is, can I ask her about the Canadian and Australian schemes that I mentioned? I take her point on COVAX being full and final settlement, but as I explained, that is not the case for the Australian model or the Canadian one, and neither of those have either a 60% disablement requirement or a maximum sum in compensation. If she's able to comment on that now, I'd invite her to do so. If not, would she write to me as to why the government thinks those are not appropriate models to follow?
The right honourable gentleman makes a very good point, and I think what I was trying to relay is that those countries that had established schemes in place extended those to the COVID-19 vaccine, and where the countries didn't have established systems in place, they set up new ones. I will write to my right honourable friend with further details, but that's a broad outline of where we are with that. Whilst evidence of a causal mechanism between vaccines and injuries reported has yet to be fully established, careful monitoring by regulators and scientists around the world has enabled certain adverse events to be identified as being linked to the COVID-19 vaccines. The NHS BSA worked closely with the MHRA and UKHSA to ensure concluded outcomes reflect the most up-to-date evidence on causation and the COVID-19 vaccines. And my right honourable friend raises the concerns that the payment of £120,000 is not sufficient to meet the needs of individuals. It's important to note, Sir Edward, that this amount is a one-off lump sum payment and is not designed to cover lifetime costs for those impacted. It's in addition to the government support package for those with a disability or long-term health condition, which includes statutory sick pay, universal credit, employment and support allowance, attendance allowance, and personal independence payments. Furthermore, the VDPS payments... I will give way.
So on the point she's just made, it is true, of course, that people have access to the benefits system. But as I said in my earlier speech, at the moment at least, if you are in receipt of a payment under the VDPS, that will count against your entitlement for benefits. At the moment, it's possible to deal with that if the claimant is still alive. If they're not, it isn't. Will the government have a look at how that might be remedied, as it is in relation to other types of payment under other schemes?
Thank you. Yes, we will definitely look into that on your behalf. Furthermore, the VDPS payment amount has significantly increased since the original VDPS payment of £10,000 set in 1979. It's been revised several times, and as the Honourable Gentleman from the opposition bench said, that the current level is set in 2007. And this will be kept under review as part of the business as usual policy work. And as my honourable friend is aware, a successful claim to VDPS does not preclude the individual from bringing a claim for damages through the courts. And that's in line with I'm getting a bit short of time. I want to make sure I cover all the points. There have been lots of points raised. So if I may continue, in line with the pre-action protocol, should the claim be brought, where the government is party to any claim, it would consider whether alternative dispute resolution, ADR, might enable the settlement of the claims without the need to commence proceedings. The form of any ADR would depend on the details of claims that are made. And my honourable friend has also raised the concerns about the 60% disability threshold. This threshold was lowered from the initial 80% to 60% in 2002. And it remains aligned with the definition of severe disablement as set out by DWP's Industrial Injuries Disablement Benefit, a widely accepted test of disability. There is no evidence at present that the current level is a significant barrier, as from 2019 and 2020, just one claim out of 70 was rejected due to this disability threshold not being met. And we will review the latest data as COVID cases are processed, but at present, evidence doesn't support lowering the threshold. Working alongside NHS BSA, our focus is now on improving the service offered by VDPS by scaling up operations and improving the underlying processes. Since taking over the operational responsibility in November 2021, NHS BSA has transformed the administration of the VDPS, previously a paper-based system. It has significantly increased its capacity to meet the demands placed on the scheme, expanding from 4 to 40 caseworkers and additional support staff, with further recruitment underway. This means claims can be processed more quickly, with personalised engagement with applicants through the allocation of named caseworkers. NHS BSA awarded a new contract to an independent third-party supplier in March 2022 to provide additional medical assessment capacity to process COVID-19 related claims. This has allowed for the conclusion of the first of those claims. The NHS BSA are working to digitise applications and medical records, streamlining the process. A wider modernisation project is also being taken forward to digitise the application form to create a simpler and swifter process and allow caseworkers to manage claims more efficiently. To allow more rapid assessments and processing speeds, NHS BSA are setting time limits for the provision of medical records with a callback process in place. Further approaches are being looked at to secure relevant medical documents faster, as this has been a key limiting factor in processing rates. My right honourable friend raised concerns about the rate of progress of VDPS, and I'm sure from what I've just indicated, you'll appreciate that there's been vast improvements over recent months. And just as an update, the NHS BSA has got 2,458 live cases. Of these, 1,203 claims are awaiting returns on requested medical records, 181 claims with medical assessors, and there's 261 awaiting requests for medical records. So the average claim takes around 6 months to investigate and process from the date NHS BSA requests a claimant's medical records. And this time frame varies from case to case, and the NHS BSA have scaled up a dedicated team of caseworkers, as I've just indicated, to move the claims forward and update the claimants on the progress of their claims. My right honourable friend raised an interesting consideration about establishing a bespoke compensation scheme for COVID-19 vaccines. And establishing a dedicated standalone compensation scheme would risk favouring those potentially damaged by COVID-19 vaccines above those damaged by other vaccines. This could create an inequality between vaccines, which could be detrimental to other vaccines programmes. I would like to thank my right honourable friend again for securing this important debate today and for everybody's contributions. I think everybody's made some really sensible contributions, and we'll take all the considerations, everything that's been said today into consideration. Now, I'm pleased that a number of COVID-19 VDPS claims have now been concluded, offering outcomes to claimants with further cases being progressed. Now is not the right time to review the VDPS. Our focus must be on improving and scaling up its operations and continuing to process claims. We will continue to further improve the service so that outcomes can be provided sooner, giving additional support for those who qualify. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And it simply falls to me, I think, to thank everyone who's participated in this debate. I hope that the Minister has got a sense of the degree of consensus that there is about the need to look again at the VDPS, or if not, to look at ways in which these cases can be settled by other means. Because, as I think the Honourable Gentleman for the Opposition put it, we cannot ignore these cases, and seeking to deal with them justly does not in any way undermine our commitment to vaccination as a public health approach. Indeed, I think most of us argue it strengthens it. It makes it more coherent. And so I hope the Minister will go away and think again. Like the Honourable Gentleman, I don't know what the future holds for her either, but I know the officials behind her will stay where they are, and I hope that they will be able to talk either to her or to her successor about what more can be done on this front, because the families who've been injured deserve better than they're getting, and the government's policy objectives will be better served if this is a scheme that works better than it does.